Thank you all so much. Now it's my honor to introduce our next speaker event, Katherine Jernigan. She is the director of Transfarmation. She has a background in food systems and sustainable agriculture and has grown food and worked with farmers for more than 10 years. She has a BA in environmental studies and a dual MBA and MS in sustainable food systems. Katherine is a relationship builder and collaborator focused on bringing people with diverse backgrounds and specialties together to achieve common goals. She works with the Transfarmation farmers to develop and execute their plans for farm transitions and ensures they have the tools and support to be successful. Now please welcome Katherine Jernigan of Transfarmation.
Thank you. Thanks. Perfect. Can you all hear me? Okay. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are aware of this project, our organization? Okay, quite a few. Awesome. Well, those of you who don't know us, I'm excited to tell you more. Thank you so much for having me today. To get started, I want to share a little bit about myself. I grew up not far from here, over in Greenville, South Carolina, a state that is also plagued by factory farming. I became an animal advocate as a teenager. One of our main roads through town, Pleasantburg Drive, is actually one of the main routes for the trucks going to the slaughterhouses. So as a child, I saw these chickens falling off of trucks, being in the road, feathers. I started to ask questions, and that led me to my career and where I am today. I ended up studying environmental studies, sustainable food systems, and sustainable business, which I'll talk more about later, is what that meant for me, how I, as an animal advocate, wanted to best apply my skills and my interests. And I've worked on farms really all over the country, all over the world. I got a lot of my farm experience by working directly on farms, all kinds of farms, small-scale organic vegetable farms, dairy farms, goat farms. And working with farmers really impacted the work that we now do with Transfarmation, understanding how farmers are thinking, how they're viewing the system. And like I said, I've been at Transfarmation now for about 4 years. So we've really seen this program go from an idea into a formal program, and we're part of the nonprofit Mercy for Animals. So what is Transfarmation? We really describe ourselves as a movement. It's much more than the work that we do with farmers. It's a movement for a better food system. So how do we do this? I think the thing we're most well known for is that first bullet point. We demonstrate alternative models to farmers. So factory farmers, the biggest, worst kinds of farmers in some ways, we show them how they can farm differently. We make their farms sustainable. We take the animals out of the equation. But we do much more than that as an organization. We also build solidarity with other movements. There's all these overlapping spheres of influence, the climate movement, people who are really big advocates for development of rural economies. So solidarity is a big part of our work as well. And then the third point is really shifting the narrative. You may be surprised to hear that most Americans, when they think of Smithfield or Tyson, they actually have a positive association. These companies have incredible PR teams because they are convincing people that factory farming is actually good. They often use this phrase, we feed the world. We farm a lot of animals, sure, but we're feeding the world. And Transfarmation is very, very tuned in to how we can fight that message, how we can reach Americans to let them know that that is not true. This is a system that harms not only animals, but also people. It harms people who participate in the economy, small businesses. So that is a large part of our work as well. And why is it needed? I probably don't need to tell the people in this room why this is needed. The animal impact of factory farming, the impact on farmers, which we share a lot of the stories of these contract farmers and how horrible the system is for them. Rural communities. Those of you who live in North Carolina have probably seen how factory farms can come in and decimate communities. And also the planetary health, the impacts to climate change. So these are all the reasons that we are doing this work. And I will play a little video that says it a little bit more concisely than I just did. Hopefully.
We've all heard of the struggling family farm, the environmental impact of factory farming, and the suffering of farmed animals. But what if we could solve these problems at the same time? A chicken farm could become a hemp farm, and a hog farm a lettuce farm. With Mercy for Animals' revolutionary Transfarmation program, this is becoming a reality. working with farmers, local consultants, and research institutions, we're creating alternatives to factory farming. Check out the transfarmationproject.org to learn more and get involved.
Okay, so that gave a great visual of what we're literally doing is taking these barns and turning them into a plant farm or a mushroom farm or a hemp farm. What our program looks like for farmers specifically is we really support them through every step of that transition. So they reach out to us, they say they want to leave, or maybe they're just even curious, and we figure out the path to do that. We have one-on-one consulting with those farmers. So if they want to farm mushrooms, we connect them with a mushroom farming expert. We coach them and train them on how to farm mushrooms. It can be a learning curve, and also provide them technical assistance. We also have a grants program. So we do research and innovation grants to see what can they turn into. Can a dairy barn and the equipment in there be transitioned into making the spawn for mushrooms? Yes, we learned because we did a project and tried it. We also do business support and resources. So farmers leaving factory farming are contracted workers. They contract with these meat companies. When you start your own farm, you are a small business owner. So someone who's worked their whole life as a contractor doesn't necessarily know all of the aspects of running a business. So we coach them on that as well. So you've got the growing and also the business side. And then we also make crop guides and enterprise budgets that all farmers can access. So we do hear from other farmers, small organic growers who want to try mushrooms, they want to try hemp, and we share those as well. Everything that we do, we publish, we share for free on our website. And that's really important to us, that there's no barriers to access this information. So what's been our impact so far? We've worked with 15 farmers in 7 different states. Several of them are here in North Carolina, which is very exciting. We've done 10 of those research and innovation grants that I've mentioned, and we've also established 2 demonstration hubs, which are these really big farms. They're kind of state-of-the-art. They're a place that people can come and learn and see, farmers, the public, legislators, et cetera. And one of them is here in Wadesboro, North Carolina, so not too far from y'all. And I would... Oh my goodness. Okay, you need... Yes, Anson County. Check him out at the Anson County Farmers Market. Our farmer there is selling produce there now. His name's Tom Lim, and we'll have a video about him later too. But yeah, definitely, you got to come say hello. We've got this really awesome site. It's driving distance from y'all, and we just opened it in September of last year, so it's brand new. Okay, click. All right. But the purpose of this is it all really started with one farmer, a farmer named Craig Watts, who created a friendship with Leah Garces, who is now the president of Mercy for Animals. And I want to talk today about how sometimes one small thing can become something so much bigger. It can become a movement. And it really, transformation came out of this concept of we have animal advocates on one side who can sometimes be viewed in a certain light. We have factory farmers on the extreme other side, and they're viewed in their own light. And these 2 people coming together was a somewhat radical idea. How would they ever be friends? How would they ever have anything in common? But what we found is those people actually have a lot in common. And when we survey farmers, actually farmers are almost as dedicated to ending factory farming as vegans and vegetarians. And that's farmers as an umbrella. So what we found is there is actually this very, very strong potential for allies through work like transformation. And we really focus heavily on that relationship building, that movement building, and also that messaging piece that I talked about. But I do want to talk about individual change as well. This is something we think about a lot if you're vegan, if you're vegetarian, and we know that diet change can have a huge impact. If you are vegan, you're saving 1,100 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, 30 square feet of forest, 20 pounds of carbon dioxide, and the life of an animal throughout each day. So we know that diet change, if you're changing your diet, if you're choosing to eat vegan or plant-based for one meal, it does have an impact. When you look at greenhouse gas emissions, probably by now you're very familiar with this concept that eating animals and animal products, the impact they have on the climate is much, much higher than plant-based foods. We get questions a lot about this. If you're shifting to growing mushrooms, if you're shifting to growing hemp, if you're growing beans, how much reduction is that in something like carbon dioxide or methane? And it really is exponential. To just substitute tofu for something like beef, it's massive. So we do know that individuals changing their diets has a big change. When you look at the animals, the quantity of animals, an average American is eating 23 chickens per year, a tenth of a cow, and a third of a pig. So we know that people have, especially Americans, we're eating a lot of meat, and we're having a big impact on just the quantity of animals. But I want to start to shift and think about you are much more powerful than just what you do. And an example of this, click, is if you happen to be someone who knows a factory farmer, if you happen to know not normal, but another kind of farmer, if you happen to interact with someone who's engaged in that system, you can have an impact that is much larger than you as an individual. And I had this when I started working with these farmers. So this is the Fayborg family. This is a family that was farming for 30 years, pigs in Iowa. They were farming 8,000 pigs a year, 8,000 of like PD every single year in these two massive, disgusting hog barns. When we closed that farm, that has the impact of 24,000 people not eating pork for an entire year. If I go out myself and I try to convince people not to eat pork for a year, I don't think I'll reach 24,000. I would try really hard. But this one farm, making that switch, was 24,000 people choosing not to eat pork for an entire year. Another example, poultry. They farm way more animals than these pig farmers. This is the Halley family in Texas. They were farming over 1 million chickens a year. That's pretty standard. We hear from farmers like that every day. How many people is that not eating chicken for a year? About 50,000. So again, depending on who an individual is, that's an individual making a change also. That's the family deciding, we're not going to do this anymore. That's an individual change, but it's impacting the same as 50,000 individuals. So that's really what we're working with and thinking about with transformation. But as an activist, I always am thinking, is focusing on individual action deterring us from making systemic change? Thinking about systems, these huge, complex systems that are interacting with each other. The answer is that dichotomy is very misleading. Comparing individual change to system change, it's not an either or. And actually, individual actions are what create system change. In the same way, system change, if you have a policy change, that changes individual action. So it does not serve us to be separating these ideas constantly and evaluating, am I doing the most I can? This is a good little graphic that shows individual change leads to collective change to system change, and they're all interacting with each other. One of the best examples of this in the real world is solar panels. When an individual chooses to install solar panels, it leads to those around them being curious, maybe installing them themselves. And when we have people like that advocating for incentives for solar panels, then we have people who may otherwise not be convinced, but maybe they have the economic incentive, then they install solar panels. And then people around them are seeing those solar panels. So this is how change happens. And it starts with one person. Sometimes it's a very bold person. And it really ripples throughout the community. Sorry, I'm struggling with my clicker. Okay, so this really gets into you are a social being, and that is what matters. And I think Bailey was talking about earlier, going out to dinner with someone and talking about vegan options. Your social influence is very powerful. And actually, influence to individuals from their community, from friends and families, is much more powerful than a distant influence if they hear it in the news or something like that. If they see someone doing it, that is where the power is. And we have these images here that show strong social ties versus weak social ties. So the characteristics of strong social ties that can lead to a critical mass is this image on the left. There's a lot of sources with tons of connections. There's an emphasis on redundancy. You might hear the same message multiple times or in different ways. There's trust. there's intimacy, and there's a foundation of cooperation and solidarity. And that's what the transformation movement is trying to get to with people in the food system. The one on the right is weak social ties, and this is still good, but this is less powerful. And this is probably where transformation is right now. We might be at the center and we're influencing certain people, and we might get these nodes of influence, like up there on the right corner, where we have a farmer like Craig Watts, who he's then going out into all these farming communities and he's talking about transformation. But it's not yet to that web. The one on the right is more acquaintances. You might hear about it from someone you just met, or a long distance relationship, someone that's geographically separated from you. And you're not gonna have that redundancy of the repetition of the message and the strength of the connections. One thing about on the right is that information can travel very quickly. Like when our organization was featured in the New York Times, it was going very far, very fast, but that's not the same as having your neighbor tell you about it. So that's what we're thinking about when I say we're building a movement. We're trying to build solidarity, like on the left, where we have these climate activists who are talking about transitioning factory farms. We have environmental groups who talk about the role that farmers play in climate and environmental impacts. We have people who advocate for, at a hyper-local level, their rural economy, their small businesses, and they're seeing how this impacts them, how factory farming is actually an issue that they should care about too. So that's really what we're going to, is finding this critical mass. But when we talk about farmers specifically, we want them to be advocating against factory farming. We want these former factory farmers who are the peer, they are the neighbor, they already have strong social ties. We need them sending out the message, not me coming to talk to them who they might not know. And so that's why we work so hard on training these farmers on how to talk about this, sharing their stories. And I think it all goes back to, this is from Cloud Atlas. And as an activist, this is something I'm just always thinking about. You know, your life is just like one little drop in this massive ocean. But at the same time, the ocean is made up of drops of water. And so I think we really have to hold that, you know, in our minds. We are really small, but we're also can be incredibly influential. And everybody is just a person at the end of the day. So I want to take it back to agriculture and give you an example of this kind of change that happened. So in the Dust Bowl years, they developed a hybrid corn that was drought resistant. And farmers in Iowa were very skeptical, and they said, no way, no thank you. And in 1931, 60% of Iowa farmers had received information about this, maybe from the media, maybe from someone knocking on their door, a sales rep. So 60% had just heard about it. 2 years later, in 33, 70% had heard about it. So a lot of people had heard about it, but only 1% were actually making that switch. But then, a small number of farmers in a controlled environment were able to experiment with these new seeds in a lab setting. They had peer support, they had technical assistance, the other farmers were there to help them out. And as more and more farmers began to try it, because their peers were trying it, that's when they reached that critical mass and the tipping point. 10 years from the, about 10 years later, 1943, 98% of farmers in Iowa had adopted that new corn seed, and it was soon 100% nationwide. So that's really what we're thinking about with transformation. At this point, maybe some people have heard about it, but only a few people have tried it. But we need to get to that point where enough people have tried it, and we're mirroring that lab setting, where they have the support, they have questions they can ask, they have their peers. So we have, you know, Tanner, the farmer in Iowa, can call Craig, Craig, the farmer in North Carolina, and say, I'm scared, I'm nervous at this point, and they can talk to each other. They have those peer connections. And that's where we're gonna get that critical mass of people switching. So we really wanna do something like this with factory farming, because at the end of the day, farmers are a limited resource. And transformation is competing for that resource with Tyson, with Smithfield, et cetera. And if we can influence where more farmers don't want to get into, you don't have to use these barns for poultry. You can grow something else. So we'll take a little tour inside here.
We are here for a ribbon cutting ceremony of our very first transformation hub here in North Carolina. It demonstrates everything we're moving away from and everything we're moving toward, which is a life after factory farming.
So when I was chicken farming, I wasn't expect this at all. But it's just a dreaming. I've been dreaming for a long time. I say to myself, like, one day, what about if I can help somebody help me to turn one of the barn into a greenhouse? It's just a dreaming, but now it's like actually come true.
1, 2, 3. It's your farm.
The biggest challenge is I'll be able to shift away from factory farming for the better way of making food system. All my family is very, very excited because they used to work with me in the poultry house back then, and right now I transit from poultry into a greenhouse. They're very excited and very happy for me, what I can do.
I just want to grow something that have to do with nature, like grow vegetable or mushroom or big greenhouse. That's all I want.
It is so significant we're doing this in North Carolina. North Carolina has some of the highest concentration of both pig and chicken factory farms, and it's growing. So we are right in the heart of it, showing that we are resisting factory farming and building a new, better way.
Transformation helped me a lot from the start point to the finish point. Since I work with Transformation, they have somebody there to help me. They have consultant to call me, or I call them to get an answer, to get an idea, to get advice, to see all these things change and to see transitioning, to see the conversion from for animal farming to greenhouse to plants. That's the most exciting, and that's a big change for me. I'm so happy now that I come to this point.
Okay, so that's a little bit about Tom and his story. And sharing videos like that, that's really how we're going to reach more people. That's why we make videos. That's why we talk to the media. That's why we're training farmers to be spokespeople. Actually, our founder last year, she wrote a book. There's a book about transformation in our work. That's why we publish everything on our website. That's why it's always free. And last year, like I mentioned, we were lucky enough to be featured in the New York Times twice. And also last year, we were featured in a Netflix series. So as I said, it's much more than just transitioning this farm. We're really building a movement. We're trying to get the momentum going. And I want to bring it all back to the people here today in this room and how we kind of make those decisions about who we're going to influence and how we're going to have that influence. Because like Tom's story shows, like Craig's story shows, you never know who you might be. You never know if you have a Paula Bowles who hears your voice and they decide to make a huge change. So for me, it always comes back to this idea. Find your own front line. Who are you? What resources do you have? What access do you have? And how can you best apply it? And that also means what are you interested in and where are your skills? Like I mentioned for myself, growing up in South Carolina, seeing these poultry farms, I knew that I loved the outdoors, the streams and rivers and everything, and this industry was destroying what I loved. And that was really what got me into seeing, oh, there's a connection between agriculture and the environment. And there's a connection between animal farming and agriculture. And how can I make my way to see how it can be most impactful? And we heard from these awesome speakers this morning. They had their own journeys. And sometimes you might, think like, oh, I need to go into, like Bailey was mentioning, nonprofits and be an animal lawyer, and that's the best use of my time. But you can actually have influence outside of maybe these more structured, not traditional, because that's not really traditional, but what you might immediately think of. I want you to think about the creative ways you might be having influence. And these questions can help you get there. Like I said, what are your passions? What are your interests? What skills and resources do you have? Like she mentioned, this land came up and she thought at first, this wouldn't be good for a sanctuary, but it ultimately has become something really beautiful. What are your community needs? People living in North Carolina, there are so many community groups working to fight factory farming, but they're also fighting it in different ways. There are people who are fighting it from the rural development side. There are people that are fighting it from the climate side. There are people fighting it from the animal side, which is amazing. But I do want to emphasize that caring about something, just caring, it is a strength in itself. And it is your strength. And I would love to see how you guys can create influence. And I will leave you with my guy, the Lorax, which unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not, because we have to care to create change. And with that, I will open it up to any questions you have. And thank you. Oh, and our contact. Yeah, you.
Have you heard of the diffusion of innovations theory?
I have not.
Okay, awesome. So I think one of the cases that you gave is actually in the book, Diffusion of Innovations. And it's basically a 1962 theory by a guy named Rogers, who studied how innovations propagate through all these different industries. And he found a common theme, that it always starts out with the same type of people, and then it spreads this way, and this is how you approach those people. So I think it would be awesome to like integrate into exactly what you're doing. So with that said, how do you find the people who are actually willing to be the innovators and step out of the norm? Do you get that? Do you just like talk to 100 forums and pick the ones that say yes, or how do you select them?
Yeah, that's a great question. We get a lot, and it was actually very simple for us, because what we did when we started was we released Craig's video and information about Craig and his story, and we created a website that was basically a contact form. And from creating that contact form alone, we've heard from hundreds of farmers. And so from that list, so if they're filling out that form, we know they're at least a little curious. From that form, with our first few years, we were able to screen them and say, who is actually like going to be most successful early on? Because that is a factor. We want to have some success stories early on, some proof of concept. But we're also looking for things like, what kind of lifestyle do they want? Do they even want to be a farmer? Because some people get caught up in this, and that is not the lifestyle for them. And if we can just help them get out and maybe go to another job, that's fine too. But we looked for those people who were really interested and the people who had the skills, the entrepreneurial spirit that we thought could be an early success. And we really focused on that with our innovation, research and innovation grants, to have those 10 examples of, we've got, like I said, dairy to mushrooms, poultry to hemp, dairy to greenhouse, every combination from dairy, pigs, and poultry into either plants, plants, mushrooms, or hemp. So we tried all those, and now we're entering a new phase where we're kind of leaving that pilot stage. Now we're actually launching like an incubator program where we can take in more farmers. They're going to receive a little bit less support because we have the blueprints, and we're hoping to expand that much further through that. It'll still be an incubator environment where they're getting the support they need, but it's a little bit less walking them through hand-holding, if that makes sense. Yeah, oh my gosh, I don't know how to choose. How about you?
The whole movement is really inspiring to me, but I guess I struggle a little bit with, so you're moving the farmers away from factory farming, but at the same time, we know that the population as a whole is not full of vegans and vegetarians, whatever, so the demand is still there. So
right.
Where are the Tysons and everybody going to be going? You know, are they going to be going if there are no tariffs to like Mexico or whatever, where the conditions are even worse? I mean, what do you think is going to be happening with that pent-up demand, or are you expecting the prices to rise so much that people start looking at alternative food sources? I mean, what's the bigger picture here?
Yeah, and I think it's all those things, and transformation is not going to solve each piece. But like our parent organization, Mercy for Animals, does try and tackle a bit more of those questions on a global scale. But I would say to the consumer part, that's where our narrative work comes in. Because we actually have people who will stop eating factory farm chicken, but will never go vegan. A lot of people do not like factory farming, but the messaging has not yet reached them. And we are really interested in those people. Of course, do I want everyone to go vegan? Please. But if I can get them to stop eating factory farm meat, that's still a win because it's getting us that much further. So we're not going to solve everything, but we do really want to work on that narrative work of telling the story. And that's why I didn't talk too much about it today, but in a lot of when we do speaking with more of a general audience, we talk about the contract system, the control this industry has over the farmers. Because if we can get people to care about those farmers as people, or the local, the region that they work in, the influence on local economies, whatever their area is that they care about, that's what we want to find and show them. So will we solve everything through this project? Probably not, but we are trying to push that to the critical mass on multiple fronts. Yeah. How about you?
Do most of the farmers like this, are they vegans in general, or are they doing it because of that, or just because it's better financially, or just they want to have their own business?
Yeah, most of them are not when they come to us, and it is primarily financial motivation. The average income the median income for a poultry farmer in 2023 was negative $2,000. So they're sold on this idea. They're going to make all this money. They'll only work a few days a week. It's all good. And that is not true. It is a very, very exploitative system for these people. And they get into it for all kinds of reasons. But they usually don't start with a vegetarian or a vegan lens. However, we have seen farmers get there. We were out at Craig's a couple days ago, and he's now rescued a baby goat who is part of the family. We have another farmer, Will Butler. He has gone vegetarian. He's aspiring vegan, and his father owned one of the most unique hog farms in North Carolina because he was the only farmer to testify in the Smithfield trials. We see that people are starting to think differently about those animals. We were with Tom yesterday walking through his poultry barns and saying, like, how did you kill this many animals? He had to kill them by hand when they were sick. Like, how do you do that? And there is so much just separation that happens in the mind. So it's definitely not our goal to try and make them all vegan or vegetarian, but if that happens along the way, I'm fine. Actually, I'll tell you, this is a long answer, but one more thing that just gives me hope is we took some of the farmers out to dinner at Fiction Kitchen, amazing restaurant. And one of the farmers posted it on his Instagram, like, amazing food. And another farmer that works with us is like, yes, and also check out Vibe in Fayetteville. They also have amazing food. So this is two former factory farmers that are now talking about amazing vegan food. So there is hope there. Yeah, that was a long answer, but yeah.
What are the solutions and options if farmers are going from animal agriculture? What happens to the individuals who have been confined on which farms?
Yeah. So what happens to the animals that are on these farms? Which is a great question. So the way the system is set up is that these farmers do not own the animals. This is property of Tyson, Smithfield, whoever they contract with. So if a farmer decides to do something different with the animals than what that contract has laid out, it is a crime. We have farmers the company has justified that taking a couple of chicks and rescuing them is theft. As you heard from earlier, they can be incredibly determined in their legal justification for why these animals are their property. So ultimately, the farmers we work with, we have to be really careful about what we advise them on. We don't give them legal advice. But at the end of the day, most of the farmers, the best they can do is stop getting any more animals. Yeah, which is a very difficult truth. Yeah.
Two questions. One, can we visit the hub in North Carolina, like the baby tours or anything like that?
Yes, we just opened it, and we're still trying to figure all that out, but we do want to have events and tours, and definitely if we want to arrange something with the people here, we can certainly make that happen, yeah.
Second question is, I've been following the project for a couple of years. I think it's really cool that everybody wins, like no one loses a job, no one's mad at, militant vegans and all that. But what do you think is like the bottleneck point? Like, is there any part of this whole project that, like, if this part, that would help it explode and take off?
I love that question. At the end of the day, we as an organization, I have 4 people on my team. We're small. We're mighty, but we are very small. There's no way we're going to reach every factory farmer. That's why we advocate for policy. We spend a lot of time advocating for what ultimately became the Industrial Agriculture Conversion Act, with Cory Booker and Alma Adams. This would be a federal policy that uses EQIP funds, which is probably getting too in the weeds of agricultural subsidies, but basically would give farmers a financial incentive to transition. And this is something that has gotten bipartisan support. Ultimately, the Farm Bill from 2023 has still not come to fruition. So what's going to happen with that? I have no idea, but it is very important that we continue to push for these policies because the government has a role to play in making this happen at scale. And I do want to emphasize that we have seen massive agricultural change happen nearly overnight in our country's past. A good example that is really evident here in North Carolina is the transition out of tobacco farming. When the government acknowledged the issues around that industry, the public health impacts of smoking, they created subsidies for farmers to go and grow other things, and they did. So we know that this can work. It's just a matter of getting the critical mass, getting the buy-in, and getting the policy in place. But if we just do the policy alone and we don't have that public support, it's not going to work. We have to have both. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I mean, one more? Okay. Yes.
Has your group worked with Sarah Tabor, who ran for Commissioner of Agriculture this last election?
No.
It's the same type of transition farming as you do.
You'll have to give me her information. I'll write down the name.
She's amazing.
Awesome. And yeah, we actually have found so many people working in policy. And it might not be the animal thing that's bringing them in. It might be because of the economic impact. But whatever it is, we have found bipartisan support. And we do go advocate on the Hill. And we do meet with people across the spectrum. We take meetings with everybody. And we do talk about it and frame it to what matters to them. Because at the end of the day, factory farming is impacting us all, no matter where you live. And so people should care about it. But yeah, thank you so much, and I'll be around if you have more questions.